We live in a country where politicians are more afraid of voters than voters are of politicians. That's how we want it. That feels filthier. That feels like a grosser part of rock and roll, but not what I think. And you know that.
Over to you, Chris.
Like, I don't know.
What if he's still around?
Cool story, comma, bro.
Bro, comma, indeed. Welcome, everyone, to Whole Hog Politics. I'm Bill Sammon, joined by my old pal, Chris Stirewalt. We both work at The Hill and News Nation, but only you, Chris, are the author of Whole Hog Politics, the bodacious political newsletter published every week at thehill.com. Chris, I love it when you answer viewer or reader questions, and you got a question this week about Greenland. But before we get into the substance of your answer, I want to set the table with a couple of preliminary questions about Greenland. One is the basic: do you think it is more or less likely that the United States will, to use the term of art that's being currently used, acquire Greenland in some way? And secondly, if the answer to that question is yes, and let me just put this up on the screen. I'm going to give you a multiple choice question here.
Oh boy.
What do you think would be the most likely way that the United States would acquire Greenland? One, a purchase like the Virgin Islands, making it a U.S. territory. Two, a free association. I guess they call those COFAs, like the Marshall Islands, meaning it remains sovereign, but the U.S. would provide, the U.S. and the U.S. alone would provide defense. Or three, a military takeover, which might fracture, of course, the NATO alliance. So again, do you think it's more likely that we'll end up with Greenland than not? Because remember, a few months ago, or even going back to the first Trump term, when Trump talked about acquiring Greenland, it was sort of laughed off, and we all said, well, he's just kind of being provocative and he's being funny and this and that. But as we've seen with Venezuela and some other things, it now feels like this might happen. What's your thought?
Well, I think first we need to establish how we pronounce the name of this territory. Since very seldom has anybody but people who study glaciers had cause to talk about this Danish colony territorial holding very much in the past 60 years. How do we pronounce the name of this place of 60,000 people eating what I assume is puffin meat? And did you read the Wall Street Journal piece about their economy?
No.
The basis is $1 billion in subsidies for the people who live there from their mother country, and then shrimping. So it's a shrimp and subsidy-based economy. It's about 58,000 people. I feel like Greenland sounds cozier, sounds nicer. Greenland sounds wrong somehow to me. What we need for the Whole Hog style book? What is the correct, sir?
We're going to make a pronouncement. We're going to make a ruling on the spot. I say Greenland.
Greenland. It does. It seems nicer. It seems
emphasize
cozier.
the color.
Yeah, Greenland, and also like it's your neighbor, it's your buddy. Okay, so will the United States end up with control of Greenland? All things are possible. The world is weird. So it's certainly possible. It still seems unlikely to me, only because convincing the people of the United States to spend $700 billion at the low end of the estimate to acquire this territory.
Yeah. That's if we go the purchase route.
Well, so the other route, every other route. So there's the purchase route is that the Danes are so afraid that the United States will go to war that they willingly sell it to the United States, that the Trump administration, the president, creates a circumstance where the Danes say, better to get $1 trillion from America and avoid war than go to war. I doubt it. The Danes are not poor. They're not strapped. And so I'm a little dubious about that, because I also think they know that in American politics, the idea that a nation that is strapped, right? We are a fiscal basket case. We're the richest country in the world, but we're a mess, right? Our debt service, by the way, is about $1 trillion a year, and it's about to surpass Medicaid, right? So it's like cha-chung, cha-chung, cha-chung.
Yeah.
And borrowing $1 trillion to buy Puffinistan seems like a tough sell with Congress. I don't know. The war part, so the voluntary association part, I think is a long-term possibility, right? So you have a long-term possibility where the Greenlanders, who until the United States started acting like a guy lurking around a food court hitting on teenagers at the Sparrow, before the United States got all creepy about Greenland, there was this arc that you could see, which is the Danes don't really want to have a colony that much, but it's got Viking vibes and it feels good to them in some ways, but it's a drag. And the very few people who live there want independence. So there was a story in which popular sentiment eventually shifts, and we say, "Hey, buddy, you're right next door. We'd happily keep our awesome access that we already have through the Danes, maybe expand it into your island, and we'll say that you're protected." So I think that is maybe a long-term possibility. I think in the short term, the government has foreclosed that by the bellicosity and all of that stuff. On the war part,
yeah, because they'd like to be independent from Denmark,
maybe.
But they don't want to be lined up. They don't want to be part of our family quite yet.
Right. If it's a kidnapping, the person who's being kidnapped is unlikely to say, "Well, he makes a good point." Stockholm syndrome doesn't take place until later in the process. It doesn't happen when the guy is standing there with the gun. So option 2 is maybe a long-term possibility. I don't know. And then 3, war is, you mentioned the Virgin Islands and the way that I'm probably off on the dates a little bit here, but basically as a function of the First World War, Britain and the other European colonial powers were like, we need help. And we said, and we need to have bases in that region. So let's get this done. The war option is the Spanish-American War, right? The 1898, totally bananas. The second most insane war that the United States. Yeah, McKinley and Hearst. The first most insane war, of course, that the United States fought was the Mexican-American War, where we basically went down and punched Mexico in the face and said, why do you keep hitting yourself? And President Polk made up a rationale for why it was necessary for us to seize all of this land from Mexico in the Southwest.
So it's a provocation. You think Trump might come up with a provocation?
The Spanish-American War is, Spain is dying. The Spanish Empire is rotting. The Philippines, they have all these rich properties around the world, and they're not able to support them anymore because Spain itself is falling to pieces, as would be made evident in the coming decades domestically in Spain. And at those times, the United States felt insecure, right? We had not been the savior of the West in the First World War yet, and we wanted to have big boy pants, and we wanted to say that we have colonies too, and we're an imperial power too. McKinley and then noted territorial lunatic Teddy Roosevelt were like, let's get it on. Let's make it happen, guys. What are we going to do? I don't think that's where America is right now. The idea that there would be a war of popular support, there was already popular support for the Spanish-American War. And it was just coming up with a casus belli, which was the explosion of the Maine outside of Havana. And if it wasn't going to be that, it was going to be something else, because America had war fever. I don't think that there's a chance that there will be that sort of jingoistic, imperialistic enthusiasm among a fairly beleaguered, and as I also said, broke government. I doubt that there's going to be public enthusiasm for Greenland in that way or against Denmark. The last one, and you alluded to this, is the provocation model, right? Keep picking, send the Coast Guard up to stop Danish shrimp trawlers, get in their face, stay in their face, like do it until you can create, and this would be not dissimilar to the president's ambitions with ICE in Minneapolis or other places, where it's like, what are you going to do about it? And then you wait for them to do something stupid, and then you say, oh, let's go. And if that happens, the possibility of a short-term military action in Greenland that the military would have to say is, well, it's like there's something going on. This falls within the Article 2 powers of the presidency. Pentagon says, yeah, we can take action. In that scenario, I don't know if it breaks NATO. If the United States developed popular sentiment, if a strong anti-Danish, if people are like, we're not eating ham, we're not eating Jarlsberg cheese, we hate you people, we're taking Greenland, this is us. Yeah, NATO's
the Greenland version of freedom fries.
Right. And we're only eating domestically sourced puffin. If in that scenario, yeah, of course NATO is broken because we're declaring war on another NATO state, and then you have this successor European military endeavor that's not inclusive of the United States. Then the United States has to go to Britain and say like, hey, I'm sorry, we've ended NATO, but would you stick with us and not go with these people? And we'll kill you.
There would be it wouldn't lead to a war with NATO, but it would lead to the dissolution of NATO in the sense that we would no longer be in NATO. The Europeans would continue with some sort of alliance, follow-up alliance that would not include the United States, and we would have to turn to somebody like Britain to say, can we do our thing too?
Well, and we'd say to Britain, basically, if you don't want to get Denmarked, you should stay with us, and we should form our own deal over here. And that would be a weird, complicated, hard. And again, just to point out, for Greenland, we would be doing this for Greenland. So that's why I think it's hugely unlikely that the Congress is going to ever back that play, because I think that the American public would be like, why? But on the provocation, the shrimp trawler, the Gulf of Tonkin shrimp trawler scenario, in something like that, you could have a military kablooey. But I don't know that it necessarily ends NATO, because I think if that happens, it could. But if that happens, I think that the international reaction and the public, this powerful public sentiment against it would cause Republican, like if you saw what happened on the Venezuela War Powers Resolution, Donald Trump says, we're in control of Venezuela. We run Venezuela. We da-da-da-da-da-da. And so the War Powers Resolution starts making its way through the Senate, gets over the first procedural hurdle. And then Marco Rubio goes to the Senate and says, okay, the president says a lot of things, but we don't have any troops in NATO. We don't have any troops in Venezuela. This is not a war because the successor government in Venezuela is doing its thing. We're in constant negotiations with them. It's cool. And we promise, the former senator said to his former colleagues, if we do anything else, if the military gets back involved in Venezuela, we will come to you first, which allowed Josh Hawley and Todd Young, Republicans, to say, promises have now been made. We have you on the record saying these things, and so I'm going to withdraw from this war powers deal. If Donald Trump is doing a Gulf of Tonkin situation, but it's about Greenland, the Congress, Republicans, especially if it were this year, during this election year where Republicans are ready to take a beating, they're going to yank his chain hard, right? They're going to say,
And this would be the place where Congress would finally assert itself.
And they've been trying, tapping on the cell wall, like, hey, we're in here. Maybe we should get together and talk about doing something. And in that case, the Euros might wait and say like, okay, let's watch the developing political situation in the United States before we call NATO kablooey.
Now, speaking of foreign policy and provocative actions that the Trump administration may or may not take, I want to get your sense on Iran and whether you think it's likely that the United States takes military action, perhaps airstrikes, to try to take out the Iranian regime. Obviously, we've seen the protests. We've seen the number of people killed over there, the protesters killed. So I sort of want to just get your sense of whether you think it's likely that we do take action. And secondly, whether that would be popular domestically. We talked about how the Greenland thing might not be popular domestically here. What about, if we were able to take out the regime in Iran? Now, obviously, there's lots of unintended consequences that could follow, but what's your sense of that, Chris?
Well, use Venezuela as your template. Begins very unpopular now, and we have very limited polling on this, but there are indications that it is getting more popular as the Rubio doctrine becomes clear, which is, yeah, look, we snatched this guy, we killed some people, but the military's out, we're not running Venezuela, and we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens has seemed, certainly among Republicans, seemed to make it more popular. And I talked to somebody, I talked to a person in a position to know in the United States Congress about what the heck is going on with Iran. And it sounds like what happened is that the president liked that Venezuela feeling, right? Yeah, we can do stuff. You can just do things, as the kids would say on the internet. You can just do things, and we bombed them before. Maybe we bomb them again. We'll do whatever. And that initially, U.S. allies, Saudi Arabia and Israel, said, let's think through what would happen, because this is not Venezuela, right? This is a much bigger, much more dangerous, and much more strategically placed important thing. Iran is not Venezuela, which is like if Texas had worse military. So this is like a much more perilous situation, and that the administration president was counseled by the ruler of Israel and the prime minister, or the ruler of Saudi Arabia and the prime minister of Israel. Like, let's be ready for what comes next, and let's think about.
That may be what's happening right now.
And the USS Abraham Lincoln is steaming over there. We're making ready, but then the Qataris, who are I don't know how to describe. They're always the snake in the grass in all this stuff over there, because they play this double game, and they're very they're not trusted by anybody, certainly not in the region. And the Qataris have a give Iran a chance argument. So the president drew a red line and had drawn a red line that said, if you kill anybody, if you hurt these people, you're going to suffer consequences. And now Iran is just killing these people in the streets, right? It's a bloodbath. Trucks with machine guns in the back, cornering protesters, murder, just the Revolutionary Guard is killing, right? They are slaughtering people across Iran and using the kind of tactics that, like, I assume that the Iranian regime is dead, because by the time it's a machine guns and Toyotas situation,
and hangings,
and well, right, and that's so the president has tried to draw a line that's like, well, if you just kill him in the streets, then things happen, right? And he was talking about how stuff happens, that they say things. The other people say things. The protesters being gunned down say things. The people with the machine guns say things. It's complicated. But legal through, and we always have to remember, Iran does not have equal branch of government. It has, its court system is what rules Iran. The mullahs are judges, and their court system moves fast. And they still hang people. So the legal judicial, acting under the color of law executions are, the White House seems to put
Another
a line,
red line.
well, right, seems to put a line,
Yeah.
a lightly red line between people you kill in alleyways with machine guns and people who
Right.
you hang.
Yeah.
And
It's like premeditated versus maybe not premeditated.
right. And the Qataris are I don't know enough to know, but the Qataris are not interested in living in a world where Israel and Saudi Arabia and the other Gulf states are aligned and Iran is not a counterbalance. Qatar wants to keep, they want to, in order to be two-faced, you got to have two people to look at. And if if the successor government in Iran was going to be cool, right? If you had a reformer, if you had somebody who was not stoning women to death for showing their hair, if you had a decent kind of government that wanted to participate in the wider world in Iran, that would put Qatar in a real difficult position, because the Saudis would say like, oh yeah, okay, well, who's backstopping you now? Who's backstopping you now? And they don't want that. And the president, as we know, likes Qatar, and they gave him that jet and all that stuff. So I assume he was willing to listen at least to what they wanted. So that's a long way of avoiding your question. I could have avoided your question in a lot of different ways. But if you would have asked me a week ago, I would have said that the likelihood of U.S. strikes on Iran was high. A week later, I say it's
Feels
still
a little less high.
Well, but I think you make the correct point. And this is the Venezuela deal. Venezuela, what are we going to do in Venezuela? What are we going to do in Venezuela? What are we going to do in Venezuela? Well, we don't know. Are you going to do this? Are you going to do that? Well, you keep killing all these people on the boats, and what are you doing? And then the CIA like blew up a dock or something, and what's going on? And Trump remains vague, and all options are on the table. And then one night, kablooey. So this could certainly be a buying time deal, so that we have the assets in place that we could do something. But of course, just to go back to where I began, if the United States is part of taking out the Iranian regime, what comes next? So Venezuela has been a failed state that, yes, it has influence in Cuba, but its universe has been very small. Venezuela was a client of the Russians and all this other stuff. Iran, man, there's a reason that the Persian people have gotten to or had to live through so much history. It's a real rough and important neighborhood. And what happens in Iran is very, very, very important to lots and lots and lots of people. So, and it's just a much bigger country. So if you're part of of the collapse of a regime, what comes next is real tough.
Chris, you and I spent a lot of time talking about, and rightly so, the president's approval ratings. There's a lot of talk about, here he is in his second term, and at what point might he become a lame duck, and at what point does he become disempowered, and so on and so forth. But I was watching a clip from a podcast this week, and I want to show it to you, from The Bulwark, in which Susan Glasser, I believe she writes for The Atlantic, she's coming at this from the left point of view.
So you're saying she's not a Trump fan?
No, but she raises a really interesting point, which is that, basically she's saying this conventional wisdom that, well, Trump's on the way out and he's only going to be in for so much longer, and he's not going to have another term, and he's a lame duck, and his popularity is down, and therefore that's going to make him weak and ineffective and all that. She takes a contrarian view of that, and we'll play the soundbite, and then I want to get your reaction on the other side.
Trump is somebody who escalates, and put him in a corner, tell him that his power is ebbing, tell him that he doesn't have that much longer on the political stage. And I've always feared that moment a lot. And I think that's what we're seeing is Trump on a power play to show you that actually the greatest danger of all might be Donald Trump, the lame duck, who really isn't constrained by the need to win re-election and who's furious to prove his legacy for history.
What do you make of that? That he's all about, figuring out his legacy for history, and doesn't really care the fact that, about the fact that his approval ratings are low, and, which in other presidencies that would limit what a president would do, because the president would respond to that and say, well, maybe I go with some small ball stuff here, but not Trump. He keeps swinging for the fences.
So, we used to talk, people used to talk about, I started full-time as a reporter in 1998. And people way back then talked about Bill Clinton doesn't take care of his party. He only cares about himself.
Yeah.
Christopher Hitchens wrote the famous book, No One Left to Lie To, from a left perspective about all the Clintons had done for themselves and how little they had done for their party. George W. Bush was notably different from that, in the sense that, yeah, there was some enforced discipline, particularly in the first term, Jim Jeffords and the Dairy Compact, and the U.S. attorneys. It's so funny now to think about all of the scandal and controversy around the firings of U.S. attorneys that took place, the Bush administration, and the heavy-handed tactics that they use. And Donald Trump is basically feeding U.S. attorneys to sharks in his lair, and people are like, well, there's 80 other things going on. Sorry, U.S. attorneys. There were notable flexes from the Bush administration about disciplining his party and forcing them to go along with unpopular things. But second term Bush gave Republicans a lot of leeway, right? On immigration, on Social Security reform, on a host of issues. It was like there was a pretty clear acknowledgement from the second-term Bush administration that it was like, yeah, look, nobody likes us right now. And in 2006, particularly, told Republicans, you're going to have to run away from me, and that's okay. Say what you need to say, do what you need to do. And Bush was also a big party builder, raising a lot of money for the party, the institution of the party that his father had once been the chairman of, that his grandfather had been a powerful United States senator, and that he cared about the Republican Party in a pretty clear way. Then Barack Obama becomes president, and Barack Obama ate alone, right? We've talked, I think, before here about the cap and trade vote in the House that was just did as much damage. My unpopular opinion is that the cap and trade vote on global warming that was doomed to fail in the Senate and the House was as much to do with running up the score for Republicans in 2010 as Obamacare was. And all of these difficult votes, and not listening, and not going out on the rubber chicken circuit to the right degree. And Obama ate alone. And that similar Clintonite criticism about not being a party builder and just being in it for himself. Barack Obama looks like Mark Hanna compared to Donald Trump, right?
Speaking of McKinley, Mark Hanna.
Right. There is no Republican Party. And I think often, I believe it was John Carl's reporting about as like the security barriers were still up around the Capitol post January 6th, that Trump is leaving in 2021, not attending the inauguration, and leaving, and him telling Ronna McDaniel, you're going to say what I said, is what he told her. He said, you do what I'm telling you to do, or I will leave. I will start my own party, and no Republican will ever get elected again. And it was a credible threat. And I think of that often, because what's liberating for Donald Trump as a lame duck is not caring. Freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. If as soon as you get to a point, and I think this is what Republicans need to be very, very cognizant of. If the expected outcome this November is a range between a 5-seat Democratic majority in the House, or a 25-seat Democratic majority in the House, and a Senate majority that is slightly smaller for Republicans, or even potentially a very narrow, a 1-seat majority for Democrats. If that's the range in which they're operating, once Republicans get past that moment, and it is certain that the president will be impeached again, and it is certain that the House will never pass anything again, the utility of the Republican Party to Donald Trump becomes basically zero, right?
Yeah.
As a tool.
He doesn't need him anymore.
Right. There's not, he tried, and in his mind, I suspect, he would say, well, I did everything I could. So I told you to win. I gave you the tools to win. You didn't do the things that I said, and now you're losers. And that is the point at which Donald Trump is a lame duck without legislative power, perhaps, but who becomes willing to do anything. And I think I take Susan's point, and there's truth in it, but I would also say this. The Donald Trump, so if we take the ICE circumstance in Minnesota, President keeps saying he's going to use the Insurrection Act, right? And he may, right? At any moment, this is Venezuela again. Maybe he's going to talk about it and talk about it and talk about it and talk about it. And then one day it'll just be true. And the 101st Airborne will be landing at MSP, and that armored personnel carriers will be sweeping through the city of Minneapolis, and they'll be shooting people. Maybe it's true that will happen, but it hasn't happened yet. And the reason that it hasn't happened yet, by my thinking, is once you cross the Rubicon, right? Why do we say cross the Rubicon? What's the origin of that term? Which is when Julius Caesar takes his armies across the Rubicon River, you can't go back, because what the law of the Senate said was no general can bring his army on the side of the Rubicon of Rome. All of these armies have to stay away from the city so that you do not seize power. Once you cross it, you can't uncross it. You have now broken the rule. And once you're in, you say, like, well, we might as well go for it. The reason that Trump has not crossed that river is twofold. One is, if he tries it and fails, the threat is gone, right? If he tries it and the Senate and the Supreme Court says, whoa, 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 whoa. The 101st Airborne isn't here to kill people in Minneapolis. It's here to protect us from our foreign enemies. And this is not what this is about. And if he loses that power, then what's he threatening with? Because the slow grind down on his ability to nationalize the National Guard, as the courts have continued to say, like, no, here, maybe, no, you can't do that. You can't do that. You can't do that. So if you try it and fail, you lose the power. But the other thing is, if you try it and succeed, we are in a whole different place, right? We live in a very different country. The United States before and after. So when George H.W. Bush used the Insurrection Act under political pressure from Donald Trump's forebearer, Pat Buchanan, way back when, George H.W. Bush brought Marines out of 29 Palms to go into Los Angeles during the Rodney King riots. And he did it under political pressure. And he made sure that as he did it, he was like, we're doing it, but it's fake. Don't worry. Right? I'm doing this because we have to do something, but this is not what's happening. This is not what's going on. We're not going to have Marine riflemen killing Americans. And that was a high priority for him. And it helped him get through the process of the Republican nomination. Though we remember, I do, because I'm a huge dork and I was a junior in high school. If you want to know how cool I was in high school, Pat Buchanan's convention speech in Los Angeles about the Battle of Armageddon, and told I'm sure fake, apocryphal. He probably wasn't making it up. He probably heard it, about the young soldier standing, preventing the rioters from coming and killing all the old people in an old people's home, and all of this apocalyptic hoo-ha. If Donald Trump used the Insurrection Act in the way that he's threatening to do it, and said, it's boots on the ground, it's go time. If you do that, then much like with January 6th or the broader effort around it, once that's happened, it can't be unhappened, right? And in the future, the gun is on the table, not just in the Trump presidency, but in every presidency after that, maybe I get to use the 101st Airborne to kill Americans. I don't know. Why don't you fool around and find out? Why don't you mess around and find out? And once you it's like it's Chekhov's gun. Once you put it in the play, somebody's going to shoot it later on.
Yep. Chris, before we run out of time, I want to get your take on the midterms. You wrote about this in your column today. So often when we talk about the upcoming midterms, we talk about the House and the likelihood that the Republicans will perhaps lose control of the House. And it's sort of a given that, well, the Republicans will probably hang on to the Senate. And, who knows what will happen. But you take the provocative view of, don't necessarily write off the Senate for Democrats, that there is perhaps a path for them. Give me the top line on that.
I'm a cranky person. And one of the things that makes me cranky is people say, well, it's a bad map for Democrats. It's a bad Senate map. It's a bad map. They're all bad maps for Democrats, guys. They're always bad maps for Democrats because the Democratic electorate is tightly packed in cities and suburbs. That's where the Democratic voters are. So in our federal system, with the Electoral College and with, I had to look it up because you know how my brain works. What percentage of mayors of the largest cities in the 50 largest cities in the United States, how many of them are Republicans?
I know only because I read your column, and I think it was 41 or 40.
Yeah, it's 41 Democrats, 9 Republicans and independents. They're not even all Republicans. What about the 50 largest counties? There's 50 counties in the United States that have populations
similar preponderance of
42.
Democratic control.
Right,
yeah.
42. So if you had a federal system in which those individuals got to have as much power as the Senate does nationally, well, Republicans just have to find a way to get in there. They'd have to find a way to get in, and it would change how the party worked, and it would change what kind of candidates they'd be willing to offer, and all of that stuff. So Democrats are in a similar situation because Republicans have rural America and small town America hardcore. So for Democrats, it's like, all right, we got the coasts, we got Minnesota,
upper Midwest.
Yeah, well, the Democrats have Minnesota, and they've got Illinois. They've got Minnesota. Right. They got Minnesota and Illinois that have been with them throughout because the similar states of blue dots that have populations that overwhelm the rest of the state, but everybody else is leaning Republican. And for the Senate, they're all bad maps. And this year there are 13, I think 12. I think there are 12. Yes, there are 12 races that are nominally competitive, could be competitive under the right circumstances. Yeah, that we're just going to keep an eye on. And 4 of them are democratically held places. 8 of them are Republican held places.
So the Democrats are playing defense on 4 and the Republicans are playing defense on 8.
Right. And there are 4 races that we've all been saying all along are where it's at, right? So for the Democrats, that is Michigan, where they had a surprise retirement, and they're having a heinous primary, and it could be bad. And Georgia, where they got a guy playing out of position, right? John Ossoff is too blue for a still red state. And we knew that was going to be a tough tote for Democrats, no matter what. And if they get the right Republican nominee, Brian Kemp is backing Derek Dooley down there. You put Dooley in against Ossoff, it's hard to see how exactly Ossoff is going to hang on. Though you don't rule it out, but it becomes tough. And then on the Republican side, North Carolina, Tom Tillis's retirement and the Roy Cooper, former governor, his decision to run makes that not a certain Democratic win, but it's real hard to see how the Republicans get that one, keep that one. And then in Maine, Susan Collins, which we've all gone broke making guesses about how Maine is going to vote. Though I will say the announcement from the governor of Maine, who's running against Susan Collins, that ICE is coming to Maine.
Yeah.
is not great news for Susan Collins and May. These are not the vibes that they're looking for in Bangor. So you have those four that we've talked all about. My point is, Democrats are unlikely to win the Senate, but we got to look down the list about what's going on. For example, and then I'll shut up just by saying this: Jasmine Crockett polling so well in the Texas race that she's going to, not only is the Democratic nomination hers, but Colin Allred, who would have been the best pick for Democrats there, said, I'm not even running in this. I'm going back to the House. I don't even want to deal with the juggernaut that is Jasmine Crockett. And we talked before about how she could be not just bad, obviously bad in Texas, but how she's so attention hungry and she's such a controversialist and just wild that she could provide fodder for Republicans nationally and in other races and making people disavow things that Jasmine Crockett said. Well, Emerson College did the first poll after she got in. Guess what? She's sucking wind to a state senator, a state representative,
James Tallarico,
who no one had heard of a year ago.
Yeah.
And
now, I think in fairness, there was one other poll right after she got in that had her up. And then there's this second poll, Emerson has Tallarico over Jasmine Crockett. But your point is that, you know, that if things had gone the way we thought they were going to go when we first heard about Jasmine Crockett, and maybe they still do, but at that point I was thinking, okay, and you were thinking, I think, Jasmine Crockett, she's such a big name that she'll probably drown out and suck up all the attention and she'll get the Democratic nomination. And then meanwhile, if John Cornyn, the incumbent senator who's a Republican, ends up somehow winning his primary against Paxton, who's
and Wesley Hunt, who, by the way, have you noted that Wesley Hunt is not spending much time in Congress anymore? And he's a congressman from Texas, and they need every vote that they can right now. And Wesley Hunt is running for Senate, and his people say, like, well, he'll be back if you need him for a vote. Hey, they need him for every vote. They can't afford to lose anybody, and Wesley Hunt is out.
But the significance of this Emerson poll was that, whoa, wait a minute, maybe Jasmine Crockett doesn't win the nomination, in which case, then you'd have Tallarico win the nomination, and then if Paxton wins on the Republican side, you now have to oversimplify it, you have the normie on the Democratic side. The moderate Democrat is now the nominee, and on the Republican side, the real MAGA person is the nominees, which might, give a chance for Democrats to win. Whereas the opposite scenario had been, what we were presuming, which is to say the real, wild-eyed leftist Jasmine Crockett on the Democratic side, and the normie Cornyn on the Republican side, and therefore the Republicans would be more likely to win. So that's really very fluid, now.
It's very fluid, and I don't think it's an ideological question. I think it's a characterological question. Yeah. And James Tallarico is very left, right? He's like he's a lefty Lou.
But he has the demeanor of like a preacher, and let's all work together and kumbaya.
He does not seem like a person who would say of someone that they had a bad butch built body, blah 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 blah. Yeah, he does not seem like a person who would say, oh, I didn't mean that, Jeffrey Epstein. When I was reading your name into the congressional record, I was talking about somebody else. Does not seem like as a venomous and ugly and self-centered person who Jasmine Crockett is. And the same is true on the Republican side, which is, it's not that Ken Paxton is MAGA. It's that he's a mess, right? He's had every possible scandal, his heinous divorce, his just corruption allegations out the wazoo. Ken Paxton is such a damaged candidate, but you figured, if you got two damaged candidates and you look at Jasmine Crockett, who is unappealing, and you look at Ken Paxton, who's unappealing, you sort of say, the state reverts to its partisanship, and Texas is like a R+6, and the Republican probably wins. If Paxton which right now would be the expectation, that Wesley Hunt's involvement in the race forces a runoff, and that in the runoff they can't get enough. Paxton can't get, or Cornyn can't get enough independents to come in and vote in the runoff, and Ken Paxton wins. I'm not saying, James Taylor, that it becomes a solidly Democratic state in a Tallarico-Paxton, but it sure enters the realm of possibility. And this is a race that
eke it out.
This is a race that 2 weeks ago I would have said, well, it's, Democrats' best thing for them is if the race goes quietly and people ignore Jasmine Crockett. Now it's getting interesting. So this is just my very long way of saying there's a dozen of these races out there. Nebraska, where an independent might win. And since I wrote that, Montana is coming online as an independent who is the head of the president of Montana, University of Montana, seems to be coming online for another one of these, like, I'm not a Democrat, I'm an independent, I'm your Joe Manchin, I'm this guy. So races are going to continue to come online, and we need to think more capaciously about what the Senate map is.
Chris, by the way, I should mention your column, Whole Hog Politics, is available for free to anyone, and you can sign up to get that newsletter by scanning the QR code that is on the screen, that big, beautiful QR code on our screen now. Chris, in addition to writing Whole Hog Politics and the many other things you do, you host, of course, the Sunday show, The Hill Sunday. Do you have anything coming up this weekend that is worth talking about?
I'm checking my email while you asked to see if we've confirmed any of the guests that we were working on. But I promise we have guests. We have excellence as usual. We have a river of excellence pouring forth on News Nation and your local CW affiliate. We've got a bunch, and one thing that I know that we will have, of course, is our Best in the Business panel of journalists, which we need to get you back on soon. We're going to be. We need the full Salmonator. We need it all.
I'm at your disposal.
We need it all. We got to get you back.
Say that publicly. Chris, that is all the time we have today. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Bill Sammon, joined by my old pal, Chris Stirewalt. We will see you all on the next exciting edition of Whole Hog Politics.
Suey.